Hello, my name is Erin Lamb, and I'm an Associate Professor of Bioethics and Medical Humanities at Case Western Reserve University. I'm interested in how the stories that we encounter in all sorts of media affect the ways that we think about health and health care. When we hear the word dementia, it is not a neutral word. The word triggers associations for us. We already know things, or think we know things, about dementia. These associations come from personal experiences that we may have had with people with dementia, but they also come from our culture, particularly from the popular media we consume, ranging from stories we read in the news or in novels to those we see in films and on television. Because we, as Americans, are often exposed to many of the same media and cultural sources, we tend to have commonly shared understandings of what dementia is. We might call this repository of ideas that shape how people imagine what dementia is the dementia imaginary. I want to suggest some of the common ways American culture looks at dementia. That is, what makes up the dementia imaginary in the United States. And then raise the possibility that there might be other, arguably better ways that we could imagine dementia. One of the key lenses through which we understand dementia is through the biomedical model. What I mean by the biomedical model is that we first and foremost think of dementia as disease, a pathological condition of the brain and body. Thus, the way to respond to dementia is through medical diagnosis, and the way to treat the problem of dementia is through medical interventions, particularly pharmaceutical ones. This leads to headlines about hope for a cure, and perhaps to the too rapid approval of any possible treatment. The biomedical model suggests that the money that we as a country spend on dementia should be allocated to understanding the biological mechanisms of dementia and to seeking a medical cure for it. Typically, the biomedical model presents dementia and dementia caregiving as universally negative experiences of loss and hardship. Dementia activist Kate Swaffer suggests that the moment of a dementia diagnosis is frequently accompanied by what she calls prescribed disengagement. Those diagnosed are advised to stop work, hand in their driving license, and prepare for an early death. People with dementia become viewed primarily in terms of their inabilities. Their disease and difficulties become their defining features. Critical dementia scholars have suggested that for healthcare practitioners and others, the biomedical model represents persons living with dementia as incapable of purposeful and meaningful communication and the pursuit of life-enhancing relationships and activities. That is a pretty limiting view of life with dementia. Hand in hand with the biomedical model, another key component of our dementia imaginary is the idea that dementia is a personal and familial tragedy. In the formulaic storylines of Hollywood films, dementia is almost always Alzheimer's type, and it almost always happens to people who are white, middle class, and relatively young. It's conventional to portray dementia by switching from a pre-dementia past to a present with dementia, which sets us up to see dementia as loss. The brilliance and vibrancy of the person pre-dementia, such as the fictional renowned linguistics professor Dr. Alice Howland in Still Alice, is explicitly contrasted with a later version of Alice with dementia, who cannot summon the words that previously defined her. The idea of dementia as tragedy assumes that dementia is defined by progressive neurological impairment that will steadily exterminate the person as a person. It's thus common to see dementia referred to as a loss of the self, or to portray the person with dementia as already dying or already gone when still alive. In some representations, the horror of this loss is literalized. Dementia is sometimes represented in the same ways that we portray zombies. In horror films, dementia is embodied as demonic possession or as a destructive black mold. In the dementia imaginary, the biomedical model and the overwhelming presentation of dementia as tragedy contribute to a sense of dementia as a growing crisis, which we must all work to prevent or else suffer through. Although not an infectious disease, dementia is commonly referred to as an epidemic. The portrayal of dementia as a growing crisis is common, even though dementia rates have actually been declining over the last decade. To avert the cause of this crisis, it's suggested that we should all maintain our brain health, whether through keeping our brains active or through unproven supplements. The responsibility for preventing dementia is thus placed on the individual. The dementia imaginary matters because it shapes the way that we interact with people with dementia and how we understand what it means to receive a dementia diagnosis. As those of you watching this who have dementia or care for someone with dementia surely know, the experience of dementia is more complex and nuanced and overall less negative than our popular culture represents it to be. It's time to imagine some new stories. American media and culture give us very disheartening associations with dementia that suggest that lives lived with dementia are tragic and horrific, that medicine holds the only answer to alleviating such tragedy, and that our best bet is to prevent dementia altogether by keeping our brains active. But what if American culture told us different stories about dementia? For example, what if our culture told different stories about what causes dementia? What if, instead of suggesting that we each need to keep our brains healthy, the dementia imaginary focused on social and environmental contributors to dementia? The book American Dementia argues that the current decline we're seeing in dementia cases can be largely attributed to mid-20th century policies that contributed to brain health by reducing inequality, providing widespread access to education and healthcare, and by contributing to cleaner air, soil, and water. They also note that these policies have been threatened or dismantled in more recent decades. With this larger understanding of possible causes of dementia, our media might frame brain health as something that lawmakers and citizens can promote through policy by making our society more equitable and our environments healthier. In addition to new stories about causes of dementia, what if our culture told us different stories about what it means to live with dementia? Instead of portraying a diagnosis of dementia as inevitable decline, which can only mean loss for the person with dementia and their loved ones, why couldn't the dementia imaginary instead represent dementia as an experience of change and adaptation? We can probably all think of at least one film where a character gets a terminal cancer diagnosis and we're shown how they adapt to treatment and physical limitations while developing relationships and making meaning of the time that they have left. Why not promote stories of how we can adapt to life with dementia and still find meaning and purpose? Of how we can grow through dementia to understand more about ourselves and our relationships. Change is a defining characteristic of our lives. We can demand and promote more stories like Still Mine instead of Still Alice. To get to such stories, instead of letting Hollywood give us formulaic storylines about dementia, what if we listened to stories from people with dementia? Too often, we presume that people with dementia don't have things to say, or are not able to tell their own stories. After all, if the dementia imaginary says that you don't have a self, how can you have a story? But organizations like Dementia Alliance International and Dementia Action Alliance are dedicated to promoting the voices of people with dementia. We should be elevating the complex and nuanced stories of real individuals that can challenge the formulaic scripts. This is not to say that the dominant dementia imaginary does not have any basis in people's experiences, but it certainly does not reflect all of the experiences of people with dementia. We need more stories and diverse stories. This project is one more effort to promote and facilitate stories from people with dementia. If you are someone with dementia or their caregiver, consider sharing your story more readily with others. What we need to keep in mind is that the dementia imaginary is not fixed. It is something that can change. And all of us can help to change it with the stories that we choose to share. By changing this dementia imaginary, we can make a dementia diagnosis more empowering than prescribed disengagement. Ultimately, we can forge new cultural conversations about dementia that can shift how others perceive and react to people with dementia, and thus open up new possibilities for living with dementia.